Hi, welcome to the last part of our lecture on inflation. This time we are going to have a look at some implications, at some consequences of inflation in the economy. The first point we need to mention here are changes in relative prices. When the price system is stable, when inflation is low, then we can have a certain general pattern. We know what are the relative prices, or to what extent one thing is more expensive than another. So you've got this example here of a TV that costs 1500 zloty and one loaf of bread is 1 zloty. So you say, all right, so one TV is as expensive as 1500 loaves of bread. So if the price of TV goes up, then you say, well, the value of TV is more than 1500 loaves of bread. However, if prices grow generally, then it may happen that, like in my example here, a loaf of bread would be 2000 and TV set would be 2400, and the question is, all right, so if the relative price of a TV is now 1200 loaves of bread, that would mean that TV is relatively cheaper than previously. But is it really a cheaper TV, or is it more expensive bread? So this kind of questions, this kind of problems would appear when we have inflation. It is difficult to find a stable, reliable point or background for comparisons. So we would like to have some benchmark to which we could kind of compare other prices. In the periods of high inflation, it is very difficult, close to impossible, to find such a reliable background for comparisons. The second problem, probably even more important, is redistribution of income. You know, people often think that inflation is bad because prices go up, and their way of thinking is as follows. Inflation is bad because prices grow up, my salary does not grow up, so in fact inflation decreases my income. This may be correct in some cases, but this is not generally the problem with inflation. When we have inflation, prices grow, but salaries usually grow as well. Sometimes it is simply impossible to distinguish between prices and salaries. Take the example of a hairdresser. If the services performed by hairdressers, like a haircut, becomes more expensive, prices grow, so a haircut is more expensive than it used to be, then the income of the hairdresser is also higher. So if the haircut price goes up by 20%, the income of the hairdresser goes by 20% if the number of customers stays the same, obviously. But you have to cut your hair somewhere, so the number of customers would be quite constant here. The real problem with inflation is the fact that it redistributes income, so it moves income from some people to other people. And obviously we already learned about redistribution of income. We said this is government who does that with transfer payment, with taxes. So there is a redistribution of income, and this is a kind of proper action of the government to have this redistribution of income. Moving income from those that are rich to those who are poor. That's what we want to do. We want to decrease inequalities. But wait a second. With inflation, it is completely different, because inflation has this tendency of redistributing income from those poor to those rich. So it goes the other way around. It goes against the government plan of redistribution. Just imagine what kind of influence on the income can have inflation when it comes to a shop assistant and a shop owner. Right? Obviously, the shop owner is able to change the prices of goods sold at the same rate as inflation is. So if prices grow, the prices in the shop would grow as well. Therefore, the total revenue of the shop owner will grow at the same rate, or can grow at the same rate as inflation. So in real terms, the total revenue of the shop owner is stable. When it comes to a shop assistant that works for a fixed salary, well, this salary is losing its purchasing power. Actually, for the shop owner, the cost of the salary in real terms is decreasing. So the shop owner makes extra money on the fact that the shop assistant's salary is fixed. Even if the shop assistant gets the pay rise once a year, twice a year, once a quarter, this idea of fixed salary and very changeable prices that are enjoyed by the shop owner, this idea remains. So the redistribution of income from those generally poorer to those generally richer is a fact. Business owners may benefit from inflation. Hired employees will not. Teachers, pensioners certainly will be hit by rapid inflation, because their salaries, or pensioners' pensions, they do not follow the inflation. Generally speaking, wealthy people have more opportunities to get protected from inflation. They don't have all their assets in form of money, for instance. They often have some property like houses, land, they have businesses. So those ways of allocating your wealth is much better in the times of inflation, rather than having a bank deposit with some parts of your salary. So this is the major, I believe this is the most important, or one of the most important problems caused by the inflation, redistribution of income. Higher level of uncertainty. Usually inflation is not stable, so prices grow, but they grow at various rates. There are months they grow faster, there are months they grow more slowly. So if prices keep changing, generally all costs keep changing, it is difficult to make prediction about future levels of prices, future level of costs. It's difficult to predict total revenues, it's difficult to predict total costs. Therefore, it is also difficult to predict profits, profitability. Forecasting during inflation is much more problematic. It's more difficult, and the chance that your forecast will be false will be pretty far from what really happens. This chance is quite big. Therefore, the risk increases, and that discourages businesses from investing. That's why we find high inflation very negative, very badly affecting economic growth, because the risk is high, because businesses are uncertain, and that's what businesses don't like. Investment is low in the times of uncertainty. On the other hand, and this is a real problem, fighting inflation is bad for economic growth as well. especially in the short run. Some actions aimed at lowering inflation are usually very difficult to handle for businesses. So if we do not touch this high inflation, this is bad for economic growth, but unfortunately, if you want to fight inflation, this will also have a negative impact on businesses. That's why we like to avoid inflation as much as possible, because if you have inflation, there is no good way out of this situation. Inflation is also bad for the balance of payments. Initially, it makes imported goods cheaper and exported goods more expensive. So that would be bad for the exports and good for the imports. On the other hand, that will also influence the exchange rates, because if imports increases, then we need more of foreign currency to pay for these imports. So that would increase the demand for foreign currency. That would increase the price of the foreign currency. Therefore, the value of our domestic currency would fall. Generally speaking, changes in the exchange rates may be very dangerous for businesses that are involved in exporting, importing activities. It is also quite dangerous for businesses and individuals that have loans in foreign currencies. So, for instance, we can remember many people taking mortgage that was denominated in Swiss franc. Their idea was to benefit from low interest rates that were in Switzerland. But obviously the cost of such a mortgage depends not only on the interest rate, which is low, but also on the exchange rate, how much you need to pay for 1 Swiss franc. So you are vulnerable when it comes to exchange rates. And inflation doesn't help here, certainly. Last but not least, the last element of costs that we have when we experience inflation in the economy, these are additional resources. So when we have inflation, we need some additional resources, and it contributes to additional costs of running a business. So, for instance, if you have a fancy restaurant with some fancy price lists, well, you have to change it quite often because prices would change. We call it so-called menu cost. Businesses have to employ consultants to deal somehow with this uncertainty that was caused by inflation. So this is additional cost for businesses, and those consultants obviously may help, but they do not guarantee, they do not eliminate the effect of uncertainty. People avoid having money. In the times of inflation, people avoid having money, therefore they more often visit banks or more often visit ATMs, cash dispensers, because they only withdraw small amounts of money so that the money they have in their pockets would not lose values. So there are many other cases, there are many other examples of additional resources that have to be used when we have inflation. And remember, those effects, those costs are the higher is inflation. Hence, we like inflation to be low. For creeping inflation, for instance, you are not very much worried about the loss in the value of money that you have in your wallet. When it comes to hyperinflation, well, then you have some reasons to be concerned. We have already covered the topic of unemployment, but inflation, talking about inflation, is a nice occasion to link those two things, because there is a certain connection, allegedly there is some connection between unemployment rate and inflation rate. That was discovered by famous economists Phillips in the late 50s. The idea is as follows. Over the short run, especially that holds true for the short run analysis. Now, if you want to decrease inflation, then you are quite likely to increase unemployment. So trying to fight inflation in the economy, you are quite likely to increase unemployment. Trying to decrease unemployment, trying to fight unemployment, you may trigger inflation. So this is what it is. Phillips curve shows you here. Obviously, it doesn't mean that if you create inflation, you will reduce unemployment. No, it doesn't go this way. So the economy doesn't stick to this curve. You can have the situation of high rate of inflation and high rate of unemployment at the same time. This is possible. So this Phillips curve is more like a kind of border. You cannot go to the 0 point because there is this curve discovered by Phillips. The more you want to put down inflation to some very low level, the stronger are signals that you send to the economy resulting in unemployment. The more you want to fight unemployment, the greater inflationary pressure you create. So this is the short run analysis, because over the long run, economists believe that the Phillips curve is vertical. So there is no trade-off here between inflation and unemployment. This unemployment over the long run is usually at the level of NAIRU, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. And the mechanism of this long run Phillips curve, why is it vertical, is explained quite carefully in the slide here. That is all what I wanted to tell you about inflation. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you will watch some other lectures on some other interesting topics. Thank you. Bye bye.